My name is Arjun Buchow, and I'm really enjoying this this evening. And I really appreciate that. I was just saying, Ash, that we have all these, times to take breaks, and all these considerations to feel included, like David was talking about. Usually I feel like in conferences I feel a little bit more pressure to be sort of extroverted and network and that kind of thing, but sort of this really comfortable situation has helped me sort of be more my quiet self, so I'm really appreciating that about this evening. I want to talk a little bit about some of these, sort of a new research project that I'm embarking on, so please excuse me if some of my thoughts are not well formed yet, but what I'm starting to look at is sort of the aspects of legacies of colonialism and imperialism in tech and startups. So completely new topic for me, so thanks for bearing with me. I am not a native New Yorker, but I've been in New York for more than a decade. Originally, I'm from the Baltimore area of Filipino ancestry. And for several years, going back maybe 4 years or so, I've been working with the Lower East Side Girls Club. And this is one of my first workshops there, where we were doing wearable computing. We're making little light-up LED pillows. And so, so I wanted to sort of contextualize sort of my thinking about sort of diversity starting here at the Girls Club, and with some of the experiments that I was doing on my own here in Brooklyn. Most of what I do is very screen-based, but in recent years I've been getting a little bit more into hardware, hobby computing, and this was around the same time that Make Magazine, the maker movement, started to sort of come up. And it's really great to see the intersection of screen-based folks in tech, with hardware-based folks in tech, with designers, with crafters, that kind of thing. So it's been very gratifying to see. And actually this project right here, which was a prototype for a bike helmet that had turn signals that were activated by motion as opposed to buttons, or opposed to something that was on your bike. A lot of my bike accessories get stolen, so I was experimenting with putting them all on my head. That brought me to MIT Media Lab for a couple of years, from 2011 to 2013, and it was a very different setting than the Lower East Side Girls Club. And so, there was this like sort of smooth cathedral aspect to it that maybe some of you might, well, this car I think is a great example of it. It's a really beautiful, small, autonomous vehicle that has sort of that smooth cathedral-like aspect to it. And so I remember the director of the Media Lab, Joe Ito, once, he was hired the same year that my cohort came to the Media Lab, and he said something along the lines of he thought that he could never work there because of that sort of smooth cathedral-like aspect to it. And so it's interesting to sort of, be a representative of that space for a while, just sort of thought of as a sort of media cathedral, and then be inside the space and witness a lot of microaggressions. And so, we've talked a lot about sort of the ways that discrimination is more sophisticated now. And so, when I Googled microaggressions yesterday, I saw, and maybe you've seen some of these too, all these different phrases that different kinds of folks from different kinds of groups were writing and holding up as an example. So one phrase that I learned a lot myself is, where are you from? No, where are you really from? And also, what are you? It's interesting because I've observed that not only from groups outside my own, but also from groups that want to sort of claim me as their own. So for instance, when I have done research in Indonesia or the Philippines, I'm asked that question, and it's kind of like, just trying to sort of situate who you are and where you are. So it's not always necessarily a malicious thing. One thing that I experienced at the Media Lab that I did not expect to experience, because it is supposed to be such an interdisciplinary place, especially in the context of an engineering school, is sort of the follow-up to those microaggressions, those things that make questions microaggressions. So for instance, you know, asking these questions like, what are you? And then, you know, if you take offense at it, that's sort of like using humor to exclude you, if you know what I mean? Sort of like, you know, you can't take a joke that's supposed to be funny, you know, like sort of implying that you don't have the same level of sort of slick, intelligent humor. And that was something that I did not expect to see there. And one thing that I did also notice was that, there was this very strong divide, and since then sort of that made me become more interested in sort of seeing that in more technical communities, and that was something that I wasn't exposed to so much before, this strong divide between, this strong gender divide. And so one thing I appreciate about this event tonight, and one reason that I was attracted to this event tonight was sort of, I think that it was helpful to sort of contextualize the gender divide in a larger context of diversity, because there are a lot of issues, you know, that all of us experience together, but sort of feel separate about it sometimes, and sort of when it comes to, in my experience, and becoming very involved with the diversity committee at the Media Lab, it helped to be able to talk about discrimination, you know, not just from the perspective of females, or the perspective of Asians, or blacks, or folks with handicaps, or any of those individual perspectives, but sort of thinking about them together sometimes helped us to feel less isolated from sort of, you know, a dominant group. So that was sort of my, nutshell of my experience in the bubble in the Media Lab. My actual work there was, my technical work was expanding on that bike helmet, actually. And so it's interesting because coming out of Media Lab and coming back here to New York, there was a program that started when I finished my time to support startups, and it's called the E14 Fund. And so kind of based on the response to this bike helmet one, and this, an article in Wired UK, which will come back in my talk later, actually, Wired UK, around this bike helmet, which uses an EEG sensor to visualize your brain state as you're riding your bike. I sort of segued back here to Brooklyn. First kind of going through, you know, the final hallways of the smooth cathedral of the Media Lab. And so, you know, it's been interesting to sort of participate in startup culture through my time at the Media Lab and think about, you know, how to translate some of the lessons I learned about diversity, you know, in startup culture. So sort of how to translate, you know, the kind of benefits that a lot of startups get to folks like these ladies, these women. And this was a conference about women and entrepreneurship, again through the Lower East Side Girls Club that I participated in. And there wasn't a whole lot of technology involved, and I think there was a lot of interest from the girls, but not necessarily a whole lot of discussion of resources. So that's why it's great to hear about organizations like Code Liberation, and sort of see all these new resources for girls and women that are popping up just in the past couple years or so. Something that got me started on thinking about a more sort of longer lens, more historical context to these issues was seeing a movie at the beginning of the summer, a French movie called Violette. Has anyone seen that movie? Oh, great. It was about a biopic about a writer named Violette Leduc, who was a close colleague and possible lover, it was implied, of the writer Simone de Beauvoir, sort of a seminal writer in the feminist movement, in the existential movement. And I was really intrigued by how these two women had a kind of entrepreneurial relationship. So it was sort of like Simone de Beauvoir was acting as a VC, and Violette Leduc was sort of a startup. Her work was sort of the basis of a startup. And I mean, I couch it that way. Of course, it's not discussed in that way in the movie, but basically, Simone de Beauvoir becomes a patron of Violette Leduc. And I was really just intrigued by that relationship and intrigued by the fact that these were two women that actually lived, and two women that were in a very male-dominated society and were thinking of, were a part of that, so they were integrated into that society as well. So that led me down the pathway of a number of these books and these sort of books that are cornerstones of women's studies programs and political science programs. And because I didn't study women's studies or political science or American studies, they're all new to me. They might not be so new to you. But this was my summer reading. And so right now what I'm trying to do is sort of in the context of all of these books that kind of came around at the same time, sort of post-colonial cultural revolution, that sort of context. Think about the issues, that plague us here today, in terms of tech in the 21st century. This, some of you might have seen the series of diversity in our big company reports from Apple, from Yahoo, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, eBay, more. And I really love this interactive from USA Today because, one, you can see the visualization of diversity breakdown from all these companies, and then finally on the right-hand side you see the racial breakdown, and white people are represented as the darkest brown. And I just thought that was really interesting. So, just to make it look like there's a lot of representation of color notes. I have no idea why, I just thought that was really funny. But something that came up in a conversation with my partner Chris, who has influenced this talk a lot, was particularly when Google published their diversity report. And a lot of these reports were saying, diversity here is terrible, but we're recognizing that. We're going to make strides. Yeah. And really it was all focused on hiring. But something else that, I've been witnessing as an issue in, as far as diversity is concerned, is how these companies, which in many cases they get very big, and so then they have a venture investment arm. The diversity in hiring may be bad at companies, but the diversity in investment is often even worse. So this is one of the few discussions of that I could find, an investor of color sort of calling that out. There are a lot of people launching startups from many different kinds of minorities, but I think, the sort of notion of the glass ceiling definitely applies, and the whole notion of sort of microaggressions and the 1,000 cuts and that kind of thing. So getting back to Wired UK, it's also just interesting to think about, sort of the roles, the complicit roles that we play. So I was fortunate enough to be in this publication through the Media Lab. But at the same time, the same person who sort of published that magazine wrote an article called "Want to Be an Internet Billionaire Moved to Africa," And so, you know, that and a few articles about that came out around this topic at the same time were called out by Ars Technica. I'm quoting up top. Many people saw these articles as a return to colonial resource extraction propaganda, but this time the resource was not bauxite or diamonds, it was them. And so, you know, it's just, as a person sort of between two worlds, you know, you know, I'm from several different minorities, but at the same time, I do have, you know, a lot of different kinds of privilege. I've been privileged enough to, you know, do a lot of travel and see a lot of different kinds of innovation communities. And you know, sort of thinking about, okay, well, I participated in this publication that at the same time, you know, is sort of making these comments. It's just, you know, sort of a head scratcher right now. But one thing on the topic of sort of international startup settings, one thing that I'm starting to explore a little bit is sort of a comparative study of startup settings in the global south. So, you know, in where my family's from, in Asia, I have a friend who I sort of interviewed at length who was involved in the Chilean startup scene. And he was talking about how, you know, you sort of have legacies of colonialism inside companies in terms, or inside large companies in terms of hiring or in terms of, you know, venture investment. But then you also see the legacy in cities and countries as well. And so what my friend was talking about was how, for instance, in the Chilean startup scene, there's sort of this, you know, entrepreneurship or incubator tourism, you know, sort of you sort of travel the world in incubators, and a success, whereas success in an incubator here in the US is getting venture investment, success in an incubator in Chile is moving on to an incubator in a more economically developed country. So moving on to an incubator, say, you know, in San Francisco or here in New York. That kind of thing, which I thought was quite interesting. So yeah, it's just been, you know, sort of interesting also to think about the changing model of cultural imperialism, which you know, used to be, or it still is, you know, sort of these very big companies like KFC, you know, Mickey D's, are now becoming more and more tech companies, Starbucks too, tech companies like Amazon. Well, recently, when I was in visiting family and presenting some work in Manila, a new friend asked me, "Are you on Facebook?" And I said no. And she said, "That's a shame, because here in the Philippines, if you say computer, a lot of people will, you know, think Facebook. So you not being on Facebook is, you know, sort of, you're not going to be able to connect with a lot of people here in the Philippines." And, you know, sort of just, again, thinking about the lack of diversity in a lot of these companies, it's sad and it's frustrating to me to think that these technologies that are being wielded, you know, by all kinds of underrepresented groups as users are not being, at this point, they're not being developed by these underrepresented groups. So that's something that I hope to, I don't know, somehow see change in the future, and I think this conference is definitely, you know, a step towards that. So this is kind of a non sequitur, but in some of the research for this talk, for instance, particularly the word microaggression, this was the first thing that came up. And so there's a line of toys called Microaggression by the WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment. And you can see that there are a bunch of little wrestlers they're micro and they're aggressive. So just seeing that made me think, you know, this is the way we can take back the term microaggression. Okay, on that note, here's my contact info. Here's a fun little shot of the technology that I worked on with another person of color, and I'm really proud of that. So, thank you.